Hi guys, it's Lynette. Today we're making buttermilk biscuits for a crowd. Now this batch of biscuits will easily make 3 dozen because I make mine pretty large, but you can always get 4 dozen depending on what size your biscuit cutter is. So right now I'm just putting 8 cups of all-purpose flour in my mixing bowl. And then after I add in my 8 cups of all-purpose flour, I'm going to add in about a half a cup of sugar. This will just give a little bit of sweetness to our biscuits. Next, I'm going to add in 4 tablespoons of baking powder. And then after my 4 tablespoons of baking powder are in my bowl, I'm going to add in 2 teaspoons of baking soda and 2 teaspoons of salt. All right, so there's our baking soda and there is our salt. All right, so we're just going to mix all of this together. I get right in there with my hands. This way I can feel if there are any lumps of anything inside the flour, like if there are little clumps of baking soda or even sugar or whatever it is. I can feel it and I can kind of, squeeze them and mellow everything out, make sure everything is nice and mixed together. So that's what I'm doing here, just getting right in there with my hands. Next, we're going to add in 1 pound of cold unsalted butter. So if you are using salted butter, I would not add the salt that we added in earlier. Now I'm going to use my box grater and grate our butter right into our flour mixture. Now generally most people would have 4 sticks of butter for the 1 pound. I just happen to have a 1 pound block, so of course either will work. So I'm just going to grate my butter into my flour mixture. Make sure your butter is nice and cold. It's kind of difficult from this angle, but I want to show you what you need to do, and then I want to show you what I actually do. So there's a little bit of that grated butter. What I usually do is just hang the grater over the outside of the bowl. Just gives me a little bit more of an easier grip on my grater. So I just hang it on the outside of the bowl, just like I'm doing here. And then I just start to grate my butter and just move my grater around once I have enough butter that's built up. And you'll see exactly what I mean in a few seconds. So just go ahead and grate that cold butter. Make sure your butter's nice and cold. Everything should be cold when you're making biscuits. There we go. Now you can also cut your butter into chunks. I just find it's a lot easier to mix the butter into the flour mixture when you grate it. So either cut it into chunks or use a box grater. Either method works. It's just much easier to work it in this way. So you see I'm just grating my butter, and then once it builds up enough under there, I just kind of turn the bowl a little bit and then grate some more. And then push that butter right to the center. There you go. You're going to have to use some muscle because the butter is cold. But believe me, you'll save yourself a headache and a lot of unnecessary energy if you use a different method. So just go ahead and grate that butter in. All right, so we are almost there. Looking good. Here is our butter. And next I'm going to add in 4 tablespoons of cold sour cream. All right, so go ahead and add that to the bowl. 4 tablespoons of sour cream. And once our sour cream is in our bowl, we're just going to work everything together. So I use my hands. You can also use a pastry blender, which is a handheld tool with little grooves on the bottom. You can use a fork. But for a mixture this size, the hands are definitely the easiest. And then second would be that pastry blender. So you see I'm just working it with my hands. Now you don't want to overwork anything because you don't want to warm up that butter. But you do want to work your butter and sour cream into that flour. Just making sure all of those pieces of butter are coated in that flour, and your mixture will begin to resemble coarse crumbs, and that's what you're going for. So your butter will be kind of like coarse crumbs, and you'll have a few big chunks of butter left over, and that's perfectly okay. So you just want to work your flour and everything together like I'm doing here, and I'm going to try to show you a close-up. This is what I mean about it'll resemble coarse crumbs, and you have some chunks of butter still in there. So I'm going to work a little bit more. And you can see I'm really not handling it too much. I'm really, really gently just mixing everything together. And that's the key to any type of quick bread. You do not want to overmix at any stage. So you'll see even when we pat our dough out, we're not going to overmix it there either or overwork it. So we're almost done. I'm just feeling around, just making sure the mixture feels right. And the more you do this, the more you'll get used to what everything feels like. But this recipe is pretty foolproof. I think anybody can really make this. All right, so here is our mixture. I'm going to try to show you a little bit closer. So sorry about my camera angle. All right, that looks good. So next we're going to add in some cold buttermilk. I'm going to add in this quart, which is 4 cups. But what I usually do, of course you have to shake it up. I usually add most of it and just leave a little bit, because sometimes when you're making biscuits, you don't need all of the liquid. Like if the mixture is already moistened enough, you won't need all of it. So I just add all but about a half a cup. Start to mix it just a little bit. And if I feel like the mixture looks a little bit dry, which it does here, then I'll add some more buttermilk. And I only have a little bit left in the bottle. So that's 4 cups. I just happen to have the 1 quart, which is 4 cups. Just pour a little bit more in, and then we're going to work that in just a little bit. And I think I have a little bit left in there. If it's still a little bit dry, I'll add that last little drop. And by dry, I mean that everything is not moistened by the buttermilk. If you see too much flour in the bottom of the bowl, or if your dough is not really holding together, then you need to add a little bit more of the liquid. So I have that last little drop I added in. And we're just going to mix that with our hands. And you see I'm being very, very gentle here. Not trying to overwork my dough. And this is coming together nicely. See how everything now is sticking together. You don't have too much flour left in the bottom of the bowl. And this is what your dough looks like. All right, that looks perfect to me. Let's show you another, just to give you a little bit closer up. There we go. All right, so I'm going to put some parchment paper on my work surface. You don't really have to do this. It just makes it a little bit easier for me, because I do use a fold method when I'm patting my biscuit dough out, and I'll show you what I mean. And the parchment paper just helps me to, with the dough, to lift the dough, to fold it sometimes. So, and it also keeps my surface a little clean. So I'm going to use this size biscuit cutter. I have all types of sizes, and you can use whatever size you like. This is what I mean about you getting more or less biscuits from your batch, depending on what size biscuit cutter you use and also how thick you pat out your dough. So I'm just going to spread some of that flour over my surface, just like I'm doing here. And then I'm going to take my biscuit dough and put it right on top of the flour on my parchment paper. And I'm using a spatula just to scrape everything out of the bowl, because it is real sticky. And once all of the dough is on my surface, I'm going to sprinkle some more flour right on top. All right, so now I'm just going to start to pat my biscuit dough out. You can always use a rolling pin if you like. I'm just so used to using my hands, and it seems to be the easiest method for me, but you can definitely use a rolling pin. So we're just going to pat our dough out, and then I'm going to just try to, square it up a little bit to make sure it's pretty even across the entirety of the dough. So I'm just going to fold. So just going to fold just like this. And we're going to fold the other end over. If I see any wetness on the bottom, I put a little bit of flour on the bottom just like I did there, just to make sure the bottom of the dough is not wet. So I folded the other end over. And then if I'm able to, I'll turn the dough a quarter turn. I couldn't really lift the whole thing this time. So I said, you know what? Just go ahead and pat it out. So we're going to pat the dough out again. We're going to do this 3 times. If I see any wetness on top, I sprinkle flour just a little bit in that spot. And this is going to help to create those layers in your biscuits that you really want. So those nice layers, nice flaky biscuits. And we're just patting out here. And then I'm going to do the same thing, just fold it into thirds. Fold over. I should have adjusted my camera a little bit so you all can see a little bit better, but I think you get the idea. All right, so we're patting our dough out again. And I'm going to pat my dough out to about a 1/2 inch thickness. So my biscuits will be pretty thick. You can always do them a little bit thinner if you like, because your biscuits will rise. So I'm just going to try to make it as even as possible along the sides. I'm just kind of squishing everything in. And you do not have to knead biscuit dough like you would regular bread. That's why I'm just patting, being very gentle. So I'm going to dip my biscuit cutter in the flour and just cut my biscuit. You do not want to twist the biscuit cutter when you cut down. And there's our biscuit. You can see those layers. Look how good they look. Perfect. That's going to go on a baking sheet. So you do not want to twist your biscuit cutter when you cut your biscuits, because that will cause the sides of the biscuits to stick together and your biscuits will rise lopsided. You do not want that. You want your biscuits to rise as straight up as possible. I mean, even these are not perfect as I cut them, and they're not going to be perfect, but they're going to be better if you just follow a few things. So you definitely don't want to twist. All right, so these are looking good. And we're just going to continue to cut the rest of our biscuits. And you want to try to cut as close as possible to the other cuts so you don't have as much dough left over. So just keep on cutting. And then I'm transferring my biscuits to a parchment lined baking sheet after I cut them. So some of them are not coming up, which is really what you want because dipping the biscuit cutter in flour is supposed to keep the dough from sticking to the cutter, but it doesn't always work. So when it does get stuck, just gently push your biscuit out of the cutter. So for any biscuits that are left, I just use an offset spatula to cut away any extra biscuit dough. And then I gently lift my biscuits from the bottom, being careful not to mess up the sides too much because I don't want those lopsided biscuits. And we're just going to lift and put our biscuits right onto our parchment lined baking sheet. Now, some bakers would not use the leftover dough because they said the biscuits may be tough because, you know, you've already worked your dough a little bit. But I always use my leftover dough at least for one more cut, maybe even two. And because I'm so gentle with it, I've never had a problem with the biscuits being tough. So what I mean by the leftover dough is all of this dough that's left on my work surface after I've cut my biscuits. So I'm just going to gently push that dough all back together very gently. And then I'm just going to do one fold this time. I'm not going to do three. I'm just going to do one. So after I pat out that remaining dough, we're just going to fold over like we did with that first round. And then we're just going to pat our biscuits out. Just like I'm doing here. I cannot get rid of all that excess dough. So we cut our biscuits. I have a little bit left. I'm going to push this together. This will be the last cut that I do. And then if I'm able to, I'll fold maybe in half or in thirds. And then just pat the dough out. Cut maybe two more biscuits. And then add those to my baking sheet. I think I can get two out of this. There we go. All right, so this goes onto our baking sheet. And I will not roll any more. I won't pat any more dough out. I'll just probably discard that last little bit and just lift that up. All right, and that's all we have left. So I'm just going to fold up our paper and just get rid of this. It makes cleanup a little bit easier. Throw that out. And here are our biscuits on our baking sheet lined with parchment paper. I have my oven set to 375 degrees. I'll give you a close-up of our biscuits. They're looking good. So right before baking the biscuits, I do like to brush the biscuit tops with heavy cream. You can also do milk. You can do an egg wash. You can do melted butter. All of them yield a little bit of a different result in regards to how it looks. So I'm just going to use cream, like I said, cream or milk. Butter, to me, makes it a little bit too brown because I do bake these at a high temperature. But you can definitely do that if you like. I like to really add the butter later on, like at the end if you want to add extra butter. So we're just going to brush some of this heavy cream right on top of each of our biscuits. Now, you don't have to do this. It just gives a little bit more of a glossiness to your biscuits. You can bake them, right away without brushing them with anything. So I did want to mention that. All right, so after all of our biscuits are brushed with that heavy cream, we're going to pop them in that 375-degree oven for about 15 minutes. They'll come out looking just like this. They are so beautiful, and they smell so good. Look how nice and big and fluffy our biscuits are. They have a little bit of shine to the top. I just put these right in a serving tray to serve our guests. And it's time to enjoy. So hopefully you all will give this recipe a try, and I will talk to you all later. And I will also type the recipe in the comment section. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you later. Bye, guys.